That carton of milk in your fridge right now, the one you poured on your cereal this morning or into your coffee, might not be what you think it is. Australians trust milk. We give it to our kids without a second thought. We assume it's fresh, nutritious, and genuinely Australian. After all, the cartons show green pastures, happy cows, and little Aussie flags that make it feel safe. But behind those labels is a very different reality. Over the past few years, independent testing, food investigations, and farmer whistleblowers have revealed something most Australians would never expect: that some of the most popular milk brands sold in Coles, Woolworths, and IGA are so heavily processed they barely resemble real milk anymore. Protein levels pushed to the legal minimum, nutrients stripped out for shelf life, and sourcing practices that make a mockery of what Australian-made actually means. Even worse, many of these brands are quietly squeezing local dairy farmers so hard that quality becomes optional, as long as the product still passes regulation. In this video, we're exposing how supermarket milk really works in Australia. Not rumours, not social media panic, just facts. Who owns these brands, how the milk is processed, what's actually left in the carton, and why cheap milk always costs someone something. We'll break down the major milk brands Australians trust every day, explain what's happening behind the scenes, and by the end, I'll tell you the one type of milk I personally buy, and why it's worth paying a little more for. Because once you see how modern milk is really made, you'll never look at the dairy aisle the same way again. Let's start with the biggest myth of all. Number 1. Supermarket home brand milk isn't one product, it's a moving target. When you pick up a Coles or Woolworths home brand milk, it feels simple. Same carton, same label, same price. You assume you're buying the same milk every time. You're not. Supermarket home brand milk isn't produced by one dairy, under one standard, with one consistent process. It's produced under contract by multiple processors, and which processor you get depends entirely on where you live and which contract won that round. In one state it might come from one processor, in another state it could be a completely different one, and when contracts are renegotiated that supplier can change again. So the milk you buy in Sydney isn't the same milk someone buys in Brisbane or Melbourne, even though the carton looks identical. That's because supermarkets don't really buy milk, they buy price. Contracts are awarded to whoever can meet the supermarket's target cost, not whoever produces the best milk. And when price is the priority, consistency and quality are the first things to slide. This is why independent testing repeatedly shows supermarket milk sitting right at the bottom end of acceptable standards. Protein levels just high enough to pass, fat content that shifts between batches, nutrients weakened by heavy processing designed to stretch shelf life as long as possible, legally fine, nutritionally underwhelming. To keep waste low and margins predictable, this milk is aggressively pasteurized, sometimes filtered, sometimes adjusted, then blended back to meet minimum requirements. It's treated as a commodity, not as a real food. And here's the uncomfortable part. When you see milk selling for $1 a litre, that price didn't come from efficiency or innovation. It came from pressure. Pressure passed down the supply chain until it hits the one group with the least power to push back: the farmers. Because once you understand how little money is actually left after the supermarket takes its cut, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. How can milk that cheap possibly be produced ethically, sustainably, and at high quality, all at the same time? And that's where the maths starts to fall apart. Number 2. The maths behind cheap milk doesn't work. Milk at $1 a litre sounds like a win for shoppers. It feels affordable, familiar, harmless. But once you actually break down the numbers, it becomes clear that price simply doesn't add up. Dairy farmers in Australia are typically paid somewhere around 40 to 45 cents per litre at the farm gate. That's before the milk has even left the farm. From there, it still needs to be collected, transported, processed, pasteurized, homogenized, tested, packaged, refrigerated, distributed to stores, and then sold by a supermarket that expects a margin. By the time all of that happens, there is no universe where $1 a litre retail price leaves room for high animal welfare, careful farming, gentle processing, and fair pay. Something has to give, and it never gives at the supermarket level. Supermarkets don't shrink their margins. Processors don't volunteer to lose money. The pressure travels in one direction only, straight back to the farm. That's when cows get pushed harder, feed quality drops, corners get cut, testing standards stay legal, but only just. The goal quietly shifts from make the best milk possible to make milk that passes. This is why so much supermarket milk feels thin, flat, or inconsistent. It's not your imagination. When producers are forced to operate at the edge of viability, quality becomes a luxury, not a priority. Cheap milk also explains why shelf life has become more important than nutrition. Milk is processed more aggressively so it lasts longer on shelves and survives transport delays. Heat is turned up. Enzymes are destroyed, vitamins degrade, the milk looks fine, tastes mostly fine, and stays within regulations, but it's nutritionally hollow compared to what milk used to be. The real cost of cheap milk isn't visible on the price tag. It shows up in stressed farms, exiting farmers, and a product that technically qualifies as milk but delivers the bare minimum. And once you understand that the numbers don't work, another uncomfortable truth becomes clear. If the price is being held artificially low, then the label on the carton is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and not always honestly. Number 3. Australian-made doesn't mean what most people think it means. When Australians see Australian-made on a milk carton, the assumption is obvious. The cows are Australian. The milk is Australian. The product is fully Australian from start to finish. That's not actually what the label guarantees. Under Australia's country of origin laws, a product can be labelled Australian-made, even if the core ingredient wasn't fully produced here, as long as the final processing happened in Australia. In simple terms, it's about where the product was manufactured, not necessarily where the milk came from in its original form. And this is where things get murky. Australia imports tens of thousands of tons of milk powder every year. Most people assume that powder is only used in things like chocolate, baked goods, or long-life products. In reality, some of it is reconstituted into liquid milk during seasonal shortages or supply gaps, then processed, pasteurized, and packaged locally. Once that happens, it can legally wear an Australian-made label. To the average shopper, there's no obvious way to tell the difference. The carton still shows green fields. The wording still sounds reassuring. The price still feels normal. But what you're buying may not be fresh milk in the way most people understand it. This is why brands are very careful with their wording. You'll often see phrases like, "made in Australia from local and imported ingredients," tucked quietly into the fine print. Technically compliant, emotionally misleading. And when milk has already been dried, shipped, rehydrated, and then heat-treated again, the nutritional profile changes. Proteins denature further, enzymes are gone. What's left is safe, stable, and shelf-friendly. But it's a long way from milk straight from the farm. The problem isn't that this process is illegal. The problem is that most Australians don't realise it's happening at all. And once you understand how much flexibility exists behind those labels, it becomes easier to see why some milk looks premium, costs more, and still isn't delivering anything better in the carton. Because sometimes you're not paying for better milk, you're paying for better wording. Number 4, premium packaging doesn't mean premium milk. When people stop trusting supermarket home brands, they often do the next logical thing. They reach for milk that looks better. Thicker cartons, softer colours, words like craft, selected farms, or quality dairy quietly printed on the front. These brands are common in IGAs and independent grocers, and they position themselves as the step up from Coles and Woolworths milk. But here's the problem. In many cases, the milk inside those cartons is processed in exactly the same way as the cheaper stuff sitting 2 shelves down. Same pasteurization temperatures, same shelf life targets, same nutritional degradation. The difference isn't what happens to the milk, it's how the milk is presented. These brands exist to capture shoppers who want to feel like they're making a better choice without actually changing the underlying supply chain. You're not paying for better farming, gentler processing, or higher nutritional density. You're paying for branding, placement, and perception. That's why independent testing so often shows these premium-looking milks sitting right alongside budget brands for protein levels, fat consistency, and overall quality. They meet standards, but they don't exceed them. The most misleading part is how comfortably these products sit in independent stores. Shoppers assume IGA means independent sourcing. It doesn't. Many of these milks are produced by the same large processors supplying the major supermarkets, just under a different label. So when a carton costs an extra $1 or $2, it feels like an upgrade. In reality, it's often the same milk, treated the same way, wearing a nicer outfit. And once you realize how easy it is to dress up average milk as something special, another question naturally follows. What is actually happening to milk during processing that makes so many brands taste the same, digest the same, and deliver so little difference nutritionally? That's where the science comes in. Number 5. Ultra-pasteurization is quietly stripping milk of what makes it milk. Most people think pasteurization is a simple safety step. Heat the milk, kill the bacteria, job done. What most Australians don't realise is how far that process has been pushed. Modern supermarket milk is often heated far beyond what's needed for safety. The goal isn't just to make it safe, it's to make it last. Longer shelf life means fewer returns, less waste, and better margins. But that extra heat comes at a cost. When milk is exposed to very high temperatures, the first things to go aren't the bad bacteria. They're the fragile parts that actually make milk nutritious. Natural enzymes are destroyed, heat-sensitive vitamins degrade, proteins begin to denature, The milk stays white, stays liquid, and still legally qualifies as milk, but it's been fundamentally changed. This is also where that slightly sweet, cooked, almost caramel-like taste comes from. That flavor isn't richness, it's lactose reacting to excessive heat. Dairy scientists literally call it a cooked flavor, and once you notice it, you can't untaste it. Ultra-pasteurization also explains why so many milk brands now taste nearly identical, no matter the label. When processing is aggressive enough, it wipes out the natural variation that comes from season, feed, and farming practices. Everything gets flattened into the same bland middle. It's also why some people swear they can tolerate one milk brand but not another. The difference often isn't the cow, it's how hard the milk was processed, destroy enough enzymes and proteins, and digestion changes. Not always for the better. The milk is safe, the milk is legal, the milk will last weeks in your fridge, but it's no longer the food people think they're drinking. And once you understand how much modern milk is altered just to survive the supply chain, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who actually controls these processing decisions? And what do they prioritize when profit and quality don't line up? Number 6. Supermarkets don't just sell milk, they control the dairy industry. By this point, most people assume dairy companies are the ones making the big decisions. They're not. In Australia, supermarkets hold the real power over milk. Not farmers, not processors, not even the brands printed on the carton. Coles and Woolworths don't just decide what price you pay, they decide how much milk is produced, which processors survive, which farms get contracts, and which ones disappear quietly. This happens through buying power. When a supermarket controls the majority of grocery sales in the country, it doesn't negotiate, it dictates. Processors bid for contracts knowing that losing one supermarket deal can shut down an entire facility. Farmers sign contracts, knowing that saying no often means having nowhere else to send their milk. That imbalance changes everything. It means processors design their operations around supermarket demands, not consumer health. It means farmers produce to hit volume targets, not quality targets. And it means the milk on shelves is built to satisfy retailers first, shoppers second. This is why price wars are so damaging. When supermarkets compete publicly over who can sell milk cheaper, it looks like a win for customers. Behind the scenes, it's a race to see who can push the supply chain harder without breaking it completely. And when something has to give, it's never shelf space or profit margins, it's standards, it's care, it's choice. Once supermarkets become the gatekeepers of food, milk stops being a farm product and starts being a leverage product, something used to pull customers through the doors, even if it quietly harms the industry that produces it. And that's the moment milk stopped being food first and became a pricing weapon, which makes the next part especially uncomfortable, because some brands have learned how to look premium and ethical while still playing by those same rules. Number 7. A2 milk isn't a quality guarantee, it's a marketing shortcut. This one upsets people because A2 milk has built a reputation in Australia that feels almost untouchable. The cartons look clean and premium, the price is high, and a lot of people genuinely feel better drinking it, so it gets lumped into the better milk category without much questioning. Here's the reality. A2 milk is real in one very specific way. It comes from cows that naturally produce only the A2 beta-casein protein instead of A1. For some people, especially those with mild digestive issues, that difference can matter, but that's where the guarantee ends. The A2 label tells you nothing about how the cows are treated, what they're fed, how hard they're pushed, or how aggressively the milk is processed after it leaves the farm. It doesn't promise gentler pasteurization. It doesn't promise higher nutrition. It doesn't promise better farming practices. In fact, most A2 milk on supermarket shelves is processed using the exact same high-heat methods as every other major commercial brand. Long shelf life is still the priority. Enzymes are still destroyed. Vitamins are still degraded. The milk is still engineered for logistics, not nutrition. Independent testing has backed this up. When A2 milk has been compared side by side with other brands for overall quality, it usually lands somewhere in the middle. Not bad, not exceptional, just average, at nearly double the price, and that's the clever part. A2 Milk Company didn't reinvent milk. They rebranded one aspect of it and convinced Australians that different automatically means better. For some stomachs, it might help. For overall milk quality, it doesn't magically elevate anything. Digestibility and quality are not the same thing. If A2 works for you, that's fine. But paying premium prices doesn't mean you're getting premium milk. It means you're buying a specific protein profile wrapped in very effective marketing. And once you separate comfort from quality, another uncomfortable truth starts to emerge. Even brands Australians trust for ethical reasons aren't immune to the same pressures shaping the rest of the dairy aisle. Number 8. Even farmer-owned brands aren't immune to the pressure anymore. This is the part that surprises a lot of people, because it feels uncomfortable to say. For years, Australians have been told that if you want to do the right thing, you buy from farmer-owned or cooperative brands. And historically, that made sense. Those brands really did prioritise farmers, quality, and long-term sustainability. But the dairy industry has changed, and even co-ops are now under pressure to survive in a system that punishes anything that costs more. As supermarket prices were driven lower and lower, farmer-owned brands were forced into an impossible position: either cut costs and compete, or disappear altogether. That pressure shows up in quiet ways. Processing has become more aggressive to extend shelf life and reduce waste. Milk is standardized harder to ensure consistency. Protein and fat levels sit closer to minimum targets than they used to. The product still meets regulations, but it no longer stands out the way it once did. And when a cooperative starts struggling financially, priorities shift. Premium lines and side businesses start propping up basic milk. Efficiency starts to matter more than excellence. The language stays ethical, but the product becomes more industrial. What makes this especially confronting is that farmers inside these cooperatives have started speaking up. When the people who own the brand are unhappy with payment rates and contracts, that's not a small warning sign. It's a signal that the model itself is under strain. So while these brands may still be better than the worst supermarket options, they're no longer the guarantee they once were. And once you realize that even the good guys are being squeezed by the same system, the next question becomes unavoidable. If branding can't be trusted, and ownership doesn't tell the whole story, what does real milk actually look like anymore? Quick pause before we keep going. If this video is changing the way you look at the dairy aisle, it really helps to tap like and subscribe. This channel is about pulling apart everyday Australian products and showing what's actually behind them. And there's a lot more coming. Alright, let's keep going. Number 9. What real milk actually looks like, and why it costs more. After everything you've heard so far, it's fair to ask a simple question. If most supermarket milk is pushed to the legal minimum, aggressively processed, and built around shelf life instead of nutrition, what does real milk actually look like now? Real milk isn't perfectly uniform all year round. It changes with the seasons. Fat levels rise and fall depending on feed, weather, and pasture quality. The taste shifts slightly through the year. That variation isn't a flaw. It's a sign the milk hasn't been engineered to behave like an industrial product. Real milk also doesn't need to survive for weeks untouched in the back of your fridge. Shorter shelf life is often a sign of gentler processing, less heat, less intervention, more of what nature put there in the first place. This is the milk that still contains naturally occurring enzymes. The milk that hasn't had its proteins flattened and standardized into sameness. The milk that tastes fuller, not sweeter. Cleaner, not cooked. And yes, it costs more. It costs more because the cows aren't pushed as hard. Because feed quality matters. Because farmers are paid enough to focus on care instead of volume. Because the milk is treated as food, not as a logistics problem. That higher price isn't about luxury, it's about reality. Milk that's produced ethically, processed gently, and delivered honestly simply cannot compete with $1 a litre product designed to win supermarket price wars. Once you understand that, the dairy aisle stops looking confusing. It starts looking split into two categories: milk designed to be cheap, and milk designed to be good, which brings us to the final part of this video. Because after digging through the labels, the processing methods, the ownership structures, and the testing, there is one type of milk I personally choose, and it's not about hype, it's about trust. Number 10. The Australian milk I personally buy, and why, after looking at labels, processing methods, ownership structures, and what actually survives inside the carton, my choice comes down to something very simple. I buy milk that's honest. Personally, the Australian milk I buy is Paris Creek Farms milk. Not because it's trendy, not because it's perfect, but because it meets the criteria that actually matters once you understand how the dairy system really works. Paris Creek clearly states it uses 100% fresh Australian milk, not vague wording, not made in Australia from local and imported ingredients. Just fresh milk, sourced here, processed here. It also has a shorter shelf life, which tells you straight away it hasn't been pushed through extreme heat purely to survive logistics. That gentler processing shows up in the taste. It doesn't have that cooked, sweet flavor that ultra-pasteurized milk does. It tastes like milk used to taste. They're also transparent about where their milk comes from and how it's handled. You're not digging through fine print trying to work out what you're actually drinking. Is it more expensive? Yes. Does it last as long in the fridge? No. But that's the trade-off. I'd rather drink less milk that's properly produced than more milk that's been stripped down to the bare legal minimum. And I'd rather support a system that treats milk as food, not as a price war product designed to be as cheap and durable as possible. That doesn't mean everyone has to buy the same brand. Availability differs by state, and budgets matter. What matters is the criteria: shorter shelf life, clear sourcing, gentle processing, transparency. Once you start shopping that way, the dairy aisle becomes much simpler. Because at that point, you're no longer choosing between brands. You're choosing between milk designed to be cheap